this isn't a fair ranking list because, tell me, did you have a good launch lineup when you were a newborn? Launch lineups are easy to criticize, but let's be honest, like, come on, man. Like, it's the first day this console is out, you know? Like, developers barely had a chance to understand how these consoles work. But you know what? Yeah, we can bitch about the Wii U some more, so why not? Let's do it. Here are Nintendo's launch lineups. Pretty much just want to go through all their major systems and just kind of rank, like, what I think of each respective launch lineup. You know, like, it is very interesting to kind of see, like, okay, like, you know, like, is there a lot of variety here, a lot of good quality? Is there, like, a couple, maybe, like, one big killer app? I don't know. We'll see. It's kind of just based on, like, what I'm feeling. Like, is there good variety? Is there good quality? Let's just see. Let's start with the Nintendo 64, because that one's just funny. What the fuck is that? The Nintendo 64 always had problems when it came to quantity of games. Quality of games, yeah, a little bit. You know, I mean, overall, a lot of N64 games don't necessarily age well, but the great games are amazing. They are some of the best of all time. And that translates over to the launch lineup, because you have the best game of all time in Super Mario 64. Pilot Wings and Mario 64, and some, like, Mahjong game that was only released in Japan. So 3 launch titles over there, 2 over here, and at that point, you might as well just have Mario 64. You know what is a big, weird sticking point for me? The fact that Mario 64 was not a pack-in title. Like, this feels like it was born to be a pack-in title. You know, it just comes with your N64. But no. And it's even weirder considering, like, the N64 was going up against the Sony PlayStation, which could play CDs right out of the box. So even if you didn't buy a game with your PlayStation 1, if you had a CD, you could at least do something with it. The N64, you only have 2 launch titles, and you have a game system that doesn't do a damn thing unless you have a game with it. And the one game that was completely designed around, like, the Nintendo 64, the controller was designed for it, and you don't include that in the box, even though, like, the Super Nintendo came bundled in with Super Mario World, the NES, Mario and Duck Hunt, you know? This is a tricky one to place considering that, you know, Super Mario 64 is, you know, one of the greatest games of all time, one of the most impactful games of all time. But, like, we have other launch lineups where there's more than just, like, the one big killer app game. You have a couple other games to choose from. And for the only other game to choose from being Pilot Wing 64, like, Pilot Wing 64 is a solid time. But it's also, like, the only other solid time you could have with the N64? Other than Mahjong, if you live outside of Ohio? I'm giving this funny little critter a C because, you know, I mean, like, you have Mario 64, that's incredible. But even the fact that, like, we don't really have any other third-party games. Like, okay, sure, if you want to count that game that's exclusive to Japan, why not? But still, like, you know, like, it's a Mahjong game. It's not like this is, like, incredible third-party support. So, yeah, I think Mario 64 completely carried this launch lineup. But we have other launch lineups with, like, oh my god, this is, like, the greatest game of all time. But it's not the only game that you really have with your system, so C for N64. You might as well talk about the Nintendo Switch as well, because that had a similar problem where they went for, you know, a lower quantity of games than we're usually used to, especially at the time. You know, you look back at, like, the Wii launch lineup and the Wii U launch lineup, and yeah, like, there is, like, 20, 30 games to pick from. It's insane. Nintendo Switch, they definitely scaled back a bit. And I feel like, you know, that was both a conscious decision and also a logistical one because, like, who the hell wanted to support Nintendo right away at that time? A lot of the 2017 Nintendo Switch games from third parties felt like Nintendo was just prying for, like, just something from people. Like, hey, Ubisoft, please bring Rayman Legends to the Nintendo Switch. Please. Yeah, the Wii U game. Yeah, just please port it. Hey, Capcom, can we get something Street Fighter exclusive to the Nintendo Switch? Here's Ultra Street Fighter 2. Like, my god. So on Nintendo Switch, pretty much all you had at launch was Breath of the Wild and a bunch of other shit. 1-2 Switch was Nintendo's other published title. Kind of felt like they wanted to do, like, okay, here's your hardcore game and here's your casual game. 1-2 Switch, a lot of people will claim that should have been a pack-in game. I disagree. I think it's too fucking weird, and it's also, like, it's not really indicative of, like, this is what you can expect from the Nintendo Switch. Like, it just kind of felt like it was, like, hey, this Nintendo Switch system is kind of unique. Let's try to make a different kind of party game with it. And instead of like, the whole thing with Switch is like, hey, you can take it on the go or, put it on the TV. I don't really think 1-2 Switch really represents that very well. Super Bomberman R, I mean, that was something. It had been a long time since, like, a brand new traditional Bomberman game. So that was really cool to see. But Bomberman R, it just had this, like, level of stink to it, man. I just didn't care about that game. It just felt, like, unpolished, a little unfinished. I love, like, the art style when it comes to, like, the box art and the cutscenes. Like, I think that stuff looks pretty good. But then you actually look at the game and everything's just kind of grimy, and it's just kind of like low effort 3D models and stuff. Hell, even like when enemies die in the game, they just pop out of existence. Like, I'm like, what? Come on, man. Just Dance, Skylanders. Yeah. I think something that definitely helped is that you had the eShop. They had a good selection of solid eShop games. Nintendo published Snipper Clips, which I thought was great. Shovel Knight appeared on Nintendo Switch at launch, and the Spectre of Torment campaign was, available at launch alongside it, which was really, really cool. Fast RMX, which is kind of like an enhanced port of Fast Racing Neo from the Wii U. They spruced up some things, changed up some things, added some new things. This was pretty good. I wouldn't say it's like the best, but I feel like you have kind of a similar thing to the Nintendo 64. You have Breath of the Wild, which is kind of Mario 64 in this situation. And I'm not saying that Breath of the Wild is necessarily like this big Mario 64 moment. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's not like that big of a leap compared to Mario 64. Like, Mario 64 was revolutionary. Breath of the Wild is revolutionary in its own ways, but I don't think to that level. But that's just indicative of, like, Mario 64 was like this big open 3D game in 1996. Breath of the Wild was an open world game in 2017 that pretty much just kind of tweaked some ideas, and it sounds like I'm undermining this, but like it kind of tweaked some ideas that open world games had and just kind of opened the doors even more, which to me just kind of makes it like, it's not as revolutionary as Mario 64, but it's revolutionary and revolutionary in its own ways. Yeah, you had Mario 64, and you only had Mario 64. Breath of the Wild on Nintendo Switch, sure, it wasn't an exclusive, like it did launch on Wii U day and date with the Nintendo Switch, but that doesn't fucking matter. It released on the Wii U. The Wii U is the Wii U. Who the hell cares? Might as well have been a Nintendo Switch exclusive. I would say there was a decent amount of variety. I remember having a good enough time on Nintendo Switch. I don't think it was something where if you got a Nintendo Switch, oh my god, you were so bored on launch day. I think you had enough to keep you going. So I do think it was better than the N64, just because you did have that monumental killer app in addition to like a fair amount of other things and some good quality things. But I don't think it belongs outside of C tier. A lot of this stuff is really pushing it in terms of like what's considered like, oh my god, like this is a system seller right here. I can play Just Dance 2017 on this system. My god! I feel kind of weird putting it in B tier. I think it kind of belongs at the top of C tier. Nearly B tier. It's getting there. But yeah, it was still a pretty slim pickings launch lineup. Buddy, I want to talk about the GameCube. This is one weird-ass launch lineup. So, what do we got? We got Nintendo published games. We got Luigi's Mansion and Wave Race Blue Storm. What the hell kind of a riddle is that? Just kind of weird. Luigi's Mansion is a classic, but at the time, there's just something about it that feels underwhelming. And I think it took a bit of time to get the recognition it truly deserves. But like, it's a very short game, but it's a very cool and very atmospheric game. It's a very memorable one. And Wave Race Blue Storm, I think generally most people would agree, it's good, but it isn't as good as the N64 game. That game is hard. Wave Race Blue Storm is difficult. It's beautiful, but it's missing kind of that accessible magic of Wave Race 64. And then when it comes to like the third-party games, I think Super Monkey Ball is the biggest standout right there. That is a classic. I think that is an awesome launch title to have on the GameCube. Star Wars Rogue Leader is like incredible. It still looks great. You have Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. This was back when Pro Skater was like at the top of the food chain, man. Like, this was like one of the best damn games you could get. But keep in mind, it was also available on like everything, so it's not like it's like, oh my god, the GameCube was christened with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. It's more so like, bro, Pro Skater 3 comes to everything, so it's just like, yeah, it'll come to the GameCube. And just a bunch of sports games. You got Crazy Taxi, that's kind of cool. Batman Vengeance. Now, I think where the GameCube launch lineup kind of succeeds is only like a couple weeks later. So the GameCube launched in, November here in North America. And then just like in early December, you got Super Smash Bros. Melee and Pikmin. They don't classify as launch titles, so I don't think that should really count on this ranking, but I think that kind of made it okay, does it really matter if on day one you don't have Smash Bros. Melee if you're getting it in like 2 weeks? And Luigi's Mansion is a fun time, Wave Race is a good game, Super Monkey Ball is super fun, but overall I feel like this is another C tier. There's not that one big killer app on the GameCube at its launch. That came like 2 weeks later with Smash Melee. You could consider that to be Luigi's Mansion, but like, yeah, you're one of those weird little Nintendo gremlins if you're like, Luigi's Mansion is why I bought the GameCube. That might have very well been the case, but buddy, it's like a 3-hour-long game. This is going in C tier because like, what the hell? You add stuff to play, but like barely. Speaking of which, I want to talk about the Nintendo 3DS. That's going in D tier. There was nothing. There was like quantity, but like the quality was so ungodly low for the 3DS launch. Like, it is incredible to me. Like, back in 2023, I played through like all of the 3DS launch titles. I made a Scott Stash video about that all. I played a bit of everything. And the one thing I just noticed through it all was like, man, all these games are so damn light. And the funniest thing about it is, I think Nintendo thought Nintendogs Plus Cats was gonna be their killer app. I mean, it sure as hell wasn't gonna be Steel Diver. Steel Diver is like a cute little like demo of a game, but it isn't a game. Pilot Wings Resort is okay. Like, I do like that game, but these are not full games, man. Nintendogs, I loved Nintendogs on the DS, but when you play it again, you start to see just how minuscule this game is. Like, it needs something more to do. You need more depth to this game, because as it is, it's pretty much like, okay, check in on your dog, feed your dog, wash your dog, train your dog some tricks to bring him to competitions, and that's pretty much it. There's a couple other things, but like, I feel like there needs to be like a little bit extra going on there, and Nintendogs Plus Cats doesn't really give you that. It's pretty much Nintendogs with better graphics, and how much do we really need that? I'd say like the two best games on 3DS was Super Street Fighter 4 3D Edition and Ridge Racer 3D, and even then, like, after launch, like, they're like, those games weren't really leaving much of an impact on the handheld. Super Street Fighter 4 was damn impressive. The fact that you could get Street Fighter 4 on the 3DS, like, wow. But it is kind of like a novelty, like, it is kind of like, that is cool, but like, okay. Ridge Racer 3D was a solid racing game, but then, on the other side of things, you got Asphalt 3D, which is like Ridge Racer 3, but a lot worse. Super Monkey Ball 3D is just nothing. Like, there's nothing to that game. It is like the simplest Monkey Ball experience, really. It has some mini games here and there, but like, at the end of the day, like, it just feels like you're really lying to yourself when you're playing that game. Like, this is all fine. It's all high enough quality and the graphics are okay, but like, what are you really doing in this game? What are you doing in this game? There's nothing to it. It is so simple. It is so basic. It is not a good video game. Rayman 3D is like a botched port of Rayman 2 from the Dreamcast. Combat of Giants Dinosaurs 3D, who the hell cares about that? Bust-A-Move Universe has like nothing to it. It has like no content. Like, all these games have like such little amounts of content. It is genuinely impressive how little content there is in these games. They feel like the games that we got near the beginning of the Nintendo DS's lifespan, which that at least, like, we didn't really have like iPhone games at that time, like mobile games that we're used to these days, where like, okay, like, for $2 you get like this kind of content. These all kind of feel like, iPhone games in terms of like the quality and quantity of like what you get with them. And on the DS, that was acceptable because that was like 2004. So at the time, like, even then, like, it's not even acceptable, but it's just like, you kind of like, it wasn't as crazy that like, you were getting kind of like a smaller experience with this, like Yoshi Touch and Go on the DS. Like, that's like, okay, there's not much to this game, but like, you didn't really have like the mobile games that you have these days there. It's a little high score based game, so it's just like, You know, you got that sometimes. The fact they were trying to push games like that on the 3DS in 2011 was crazy, and there just wasn't anything really going on at the launch lineup. There was a couple things here and there to play, but it's wild because there wasn't like anything afterwards. Like, you could kind of draw some parallels with the 3DS launch lineup and the GameCube launch lineup. Like, you could draw a couple parallels. I think the GameCube one was far better. But at the very least, with the GameCube, you got Smash Brothers and Pikmin like 2 weeks later. The 3DS, you had to wait until June. Like, the 3DS launched in March. You had to wait until June to get Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D, which is like one of the best games of all time, but at the same time, it's a remake. It's an N64 game. So I feel pretty confident putting that in D tier. Rot in hell, you dirty son of a bitch. Nintendo DS, I think that belongs in C tier. The DS pretty much just had Super Mario 64 DS and Metroid Prime Hunters First Hunt, the demo. The demo for Metroid Prime Hunters, which would finally launch in like 2006. You know, the DS launched in 2004. Mario 64 DS was really cool. Outside of that, there was Asphalt Urban GT, which Asphalt is a mobile game series that kind of comes to console sometimes, especially during the launch lineup. Like, we got Asphalt Urban GT on DS, Asphalt 3D on 3DS, and Asphalt on PlayStation Vita as well. Get this fucking game series off of these things, man. Nobody wants this. Feel the magic, XYXX? That's fucking weird, isn't it? Spider-Man 2, Madden 2005, The Herbs. Thank Christ for Mario 64 DS. I gotta be honest, man, the more I'm thinking about this, like, Mario 64 DS was awesome. But again, like, you know, the N64 launched with Mario 64, which was a brand new experience at that time. Now, you know, obviously, it is really cool to see that on a handheld. That's a huge thing. But, you know, I'm kind of thinking, I'm just going like, it's still a remake, and it was a brand new game on N64. And like, Metroid Prime Hunters is just a damn demo. And like, there's nothing else going on here, man. There's nothing else to play. I think this might be D tier. I think this is high D tier, and 3DS is low D tier. How about that? But you know what's even worse than low D tier? The Game Boy Color. Oh my God. You have Centipede on Game Boy Color, Tetris DX. You already have Tetris on Game Boy. Like, yeah, the DX version is literally just, it's Tetris with a little bit of color. Yeah, good for you. And it has worse music. Like, it has fine music, but it's just like, it's not the Tetris theme that's iconic. Pocket Bomberman and Game & Watch Gallery 2. Which I like Game & Watch Gallery 2, but it's a couple of Game & Watch games. Now, of course, I think the launch lineup really does set in how much the Game Boy Color is just kind of like, it was just kind of a revision to the original Game Boy. It wasn't really meant to be its own system. Also considering how all of those games are also Game Boy games. Like, you know, they're the Game Boy Color games that also work on Game Boy, but when you put them in Game Boy Color, like, oh, wow, they're in color now. Great. So I feel pretty confident that that is like one of the worst Nintendo game console launch lineups. Now, the original Game Boy, on the other hand, this is pretty something special. Pretty low amount here. You know, you have Alleyway, Baseball, Tennis, but then you also have Super Mario Land and Tetris, which I think that's pretty massive. I mean, like, just having Tetris, and that's a pack-in game, by the way. And then, you know, you can also get Super Mario Land, which, you know, Super Mario Land, it's easy to kind of dunk on that game a little bit, but at the same time, it is kind of like, you know, like, it's Mario Land. It's one of the most popular Game Boy games, and at the same time, like, I think you're a little heartless if you think Super Mario Land is complete dog shit. It's just a little dog shit, you know, like, it's fine, and like, it is very charming, and especially in 1989, you know, like, that was a huge deal. I think. I wasn't born, but I can at least put myself in, you know, player's shoes at that time. You know, you get a Mario game on your brand new portable, and you get Tetris for free included with the system. That's pretty big. And Alleyway is, you know, it's Alleyway, you know, it's pretty much just an Arkanoid breakout clone. It's fun. And Baseball and Tennis for the jocks. You know, for the time, and also having, like, you know, two big, like, heavy-hitting, like, system-selling titles at that time, I think it's a high B tier at the very least. I think that's a big deal. I think Game Boy had a decent launch lineup for the time. And then there's Virtual Boy. Okay, so Mario's Tennis is a pack-in game, which I always found is a weird pack-in game, you know? Okay, Mario's Tennis, I'm sorry. Red Alarm, which, that game stinks. That's like Star Fox, and they forgot to finish it. Talaro Boxer, which is solid. And then Galactic Pinball, which is like, it's okay. It's just a pinball game. I mean, Talaro Boxer is like a pretty solid use of the 3D of the Virtual Boy, because it's like, you know, I mean, like, they're punching you in the face. I don't know. And I guess Mario's Tennis is a fine use of the 3D as well, because, you know, hey, you know, it's a good depth of field example, you know, being able to see like how far away something is and how far away the ball is from your racket. I think that's important with 3D because, you know, when I try to play like tennis on the original NES, it's kind of hard to tell where the ball is in relation to you and your racket. So it's just like, yeah, I guess that's a fine use, but it's just like, I'd be absolutely insane to put this in anything but D tier. I think it's definitely better than the Game Boy Color, I'll give it that, because there's actual damn games, actual like Virtual Boy games there, and you know, like most of them are fine. But the Game Boy Color has just, okay, another version of Tetris. Who cares? You can already play Tetris on Game Boy and Game Boy Color. You can just pop in the original Tetris, and everybody already owned that because like it came with the original Game Boy. And then like what? Like a bunch of old garbage. You get Centipede and Game & Watch games. Here you go. The Virtual Boy actually had like something going on there, so like, yeah, I'll give it that. Now, what about the Game Boy Advance? This one's a little tricky. So Nintendo's big titles with this one was Super Mario Advance and F-Zero Maximum Velocity, which I actually think are like really cool games to release. I mean, Mario Advance is a little weird because it's just like, okay, it's like a enhanced version of Super Mario Bros. 2 USA. Like that's your way of showing off how powerful your new handheld is. After Super Mario Bros. Deluxe was on the Game Boy Color, like that was just the full-blown original Super Mario Bros. On Game Boy Color. You know, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that you could imagine Mario 2 on a handheld. But still, I mean, like, they enhanced the hell out of it. It included the original Mario Brothers arcade game, but it's actually playable now, which is pretty cool. And then in addition, you have F-Zero Maximum Velocity, which I think really helped to show how powerful the GBA is. You know, you have this 3D racing game, high-speed racing game on the GBA, and, you know, a game series that had only ever been on home consoles up to that point. I think that's kind of a big deal. That's really cool. And then you just had like a bunch of other stuff. You had Konami Crazy Racer, so that was like the first kart racer on GBA. You know, it preceded Mario Kart Super Circuit, which is kind of cool. And then you also had like, you know, Earthworm Jim. You know, that was a, you know, port of the Super Nintendo game / Sega Genesis. So, you know, that at least showed like, hey, like this is something pretty massive. Castlevania Circle of the Moon. That's a big one. That's awesome. You know, Castlevania Circle of the Moon was kind of like, okay, here's like another game like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, but now on the Game Boy Advance. You know, here's like a sequel to a PlayStation 1 game. It's awesome. Like, I love like the Castlevania GBA games, and yeah, like this is really damn good. You also have a Namco Museum, being able to play like all those old school Namco games, you know, pretty like full-fledged quality on the Game Boy Advance. That was pretty cool. Rayman Advance, being able to play the original Rayman, that's something. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, that's a big deal. You know, the Tony Hawk games on Game Boy Advance are actually really good. You know, they had to redesign them to be like these more like top-down isometric games, but they're still really good. I think Game Boy Advance is pretty damn solid. There's a lot of stuff going on here. You know, you have a lot of new stuff, but also a lot of like older stuff, kind of a good little collage of that. Maybe a little too much old stuff, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, you know what? I think this is like low A. Now, what about the Nintendo Wii? This one's a bit tricky because Nintendo published-wise, I mean, you know, Wii Sports, that's like the game of a generation. I think it's a little strange to be like, oh yeah, Wii Sports is one of the best games of all time, because it's basically like a little tech demo, but yeah, it's one of the best games of all time. It's really dumb to say that, you know, I feel like an idiot, but it's also like, it's Wii Sports, man, it's amazing. And then in addition, you also had Twilight Princess launch on the Wii, and yeah, it was also available on GameCube, but it was initially exclusive to the Wii. It came to GameCube a couple weeks later in December of 2006. So that's big, and Twilight Princess is like pretty much the ultimate Zelda game, in my opinion, when it comes to like traditional, like, you know, the Ocarina of Time formula of 3D Zelda. I think Twilight Princess is like the ultimate variant of that. And the Wii version ain't bad, you know, like you have the motion controls, which, you know, you may love it or hate it, but I don't think they really get in the way of things. I think they're perfectly fine. Then you have Excite Truck, which is just damn fun. That is a fun game. And that also showcased how the Wii remote can, you know, be like a pretty decent little use of like a steering wheel. I mean, you have Trauma Center. That's cool. Rayman Raving Rabbids, you know, that started a whole, you know, apocalypse. Super Monkey Ball Banana Blitz, definitely better than like something like Super Monkey Ball 3D, but you know, that was kind of like the start of the end of the Monkey Ball franchise there. So it's just like, all right, there's that. Call of Duty 3, you know, that was something. Red Steel, you know, that was kind of a little disappointing. Red Steel is just kind of a just chunky ass, weird ass little game there, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I gotta be honest, a lot of the games available at the Wii's launch were a lot of like licensed games, a lot of just kind of like whatever, just like, okay, here's the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy fighting game. Here's SpongeBob Creature from the Krusty Krab. Nintendo specifically went after THQ and was like, please put a SpongeBob game on the Wii. I'm like, buddy, I don't really think you had to convince THQ to do that. I think they would have been happy to do that regardless. The Ant Bully? Buddy. I think something that definitely helped out was the Wii Shop channel. That launched alongside the Wii, so, you know, you had Super Mario 64 you could download. You could download the original Legend of Zelda, you know, Super Nintendo games, Sega Genesis games. That was a big deal. But yeah, looking at this, like, I think Nintendo's lineup was pretty solid with that. And there was stuff to play, but at the same time, I do think the third-party support was kind of lacking at that launch of the Wii. But it's also like, you had a lot of stuff going on, man. You had a lot of stuff going on. I would give it a low B. How about that? I think that's pretty fair. You know, the only reason I'm giving it that is because outside of the Nintendo published stuff, like, man, it was it's a little rough. It was a little rough during the Wii launch. But what about the Super Nintendo? Okay, let's talk about this. So, Super Mario World was packed in. Okay, that's a generation-defining game right there. SimCity on Super Nintendo. So Nintendo worked with like Maxis, who developed SimCity, to just be like, yeah, can we make our own SimCity on Super Nintendo? And it turned out to be like one of the best versions of SimCity, even to this day. You know, not saying that like, you know, other versions of SimCity aren't better. Like, they are better, but you know, there's something about the Super Nintendo one that's like just so iconic and just so cozy. You also had Gradius 3, that's a great shoot 'em up. Pilot Wings, you know, that's a great use of kind of the Mode 7 3D effect of the Super Nintendo. Then you had F-Zero, which really did, you know, another great example of 3D Mode 7, you know, Super Nintendo stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's a little lacking. You know, it's not like you have like this overwhelming amount of stuff, but, you know, back in the 90s, you know, from what I've heard of like all these other people, I would say kind of the consistent, you know, sentiment is that, you know, all you really needed was Super Mario World, and everything else was like, hey, you had a lot of other really good games at the launch. So it's just like, you were eating. You were eating if you were buying the Super Nintendo at launch and you wanted to get a couple other launch games. There was definitely some good stuff going on there. You know, you could definitely get by with like Mario World, maybe get F-Zero. That was really cool. I would say it belongs in A tier. And I think it belongs above the GBA, primarily just because like the GBA didn't really have like any generation defining like moment, I guess, in its launch titles. But the Super Nintendo did. It had a couple, you know. F-Zero was huge. Super Mario World was huge. So it's just like the quantity isn't really up there, but compared to the GBA, I think they kind of even out. You know, the GBA doesn't really have like that massive giant game kind of thing, but the Super Nintendo has that, but you know, not as many games. The GBA has like a lot of games and a lot of good games, a lot of great games. Yeah, I think they kind of even out there. All right, now here's the weird thing: the NES is kind of hard to pinpoint because like I don't really know what was a launch title and what wasn't. There's all these conflicting reports as to like, Super Mario Brothers, was that a launch title? I don't think it was. I think it's been confirmed. Like, Super Mario Brothers 1 was not a launch title. But it's up for debate. Who the hell knows? But yeah, pretty much all the NES launch titles were kind of like just a bunch of the black box bullshit Nintendo put out. Like, a lot of these games are just Man, who wants these? 10-yard fight. Baseball. Cool Land is like, whatever. Duck Hunt is like, yeah, that's great. Everybody loves Duck Hunt. And that was huge. Excite Bike, another great game. Golf. I mean, it's better than baseball. Gyromite and Stack Up, the Rob titles. These games, the whole thing with Rob the Robot was like, okay, here's an accessory designed simply to sell the NES and nothing more. It was like, oh, it's not a video game console. It's a toy, because video game consoles, like, it was hard to get retailers to stock, unproven video game devices at the time because there was too much stuff during the Atari and Television, ColecoVision, all that junk days. That's how you get the video game crash in 1983. So then Nintendo had to make up some robot bullshit and be like, we aren't a video game console, we're a toy. Look at Gyromite and Stack Up, bitch. But it's like, those games are like completely whatever, who the hell cares? Gyromite's fine, but it's like, with the robot, it's god awful. Stack Up is more of like a video game board game. Like, there's nothing that matters on screen. It's kind of just a way to control the robot to do whatever you want. Hogan's Alley is just another game to use the zapper with. Ice Climber. Ice Climber isn't the worst game. I think people kind of dog on that a little too much. It's not good. I don't really care to play Ice Climber, but like, if you sit down and you learn the controls and you get used to the controls, it's fine. Kung Fu, that's an iconic NES game. Kung Fu's a solid one. Pinball's whatever. Soccer, tennis, Wild Gunman, again, just a zapper game. Wrecking Crew, like, what the hell? There was no Donkey Kong? You didn't have Donkey Kong yet? Yeah, like Super Mario Brothers could have. Maybe it was there, maybe it wasn't. That's all up for debate. Even if it was there, man, I'm going low B, man. I'm going low B. I don't care. And look where we ended up. The Wii U. Looks like nothing hit S tier yet. Foreshadowing? God, no! Alright, here's the thing. The Wii U had, like, stuff to play at launch. None of it was really that impactful. Nintendo Land was a great pack-in, that there was so much content in that game. There was so much to keep you coming back. There was some good single-player stuff, great multiplayer stuff. I love Nintendo Land. But definitely a bit of an oddball boy when it came to, like, okay, like, here's a pack-in game to appeal to everybody, the casual market. When, like, a big chunk of the game is like, hey, look at this obscure Nintendo reference. Takamaru's Ninja Castle. Did you know that's from the mysterious Murasame Castle from the Famicom Disk System, only released in Japan? Grandma, are you listening? New Super Mario Bros. U, I think it honestly did a little more harm than it did good. I think it was great to have, like, a full-fledged, brand new 2D Mario game at launch. I think that was great. It kept you busy. But it didn't really get me excited to get a Wii U. It was kind of like, hey, here's another one of these. Even at the time, like, people were starting to get a little burnt out on the 2D Mario stuff, the New Super Mario Bros. Formula. And New Super Mario Bros. U at the time was considered one of the best New Super Mario Bros. Games. At this time, it is the one I want to play the very least. I don't give a damn about that game. But at the time, it gave you something to do with your Wii U. Like, it gave you a high-quality 2D Mario game to blast through, and you can jam through the challenge mode and play through multiplayer stuff, and there was a lot of stuff to do with New Super Mario Bros. U. It's a high quality launch title. But a killer app, no. But there was a lot of other stuff on Wii U. Zombie U was a big deal, but that's kind of like a very mixed game. Either you liked it or you were just like, I don't give a shit about this at all. Scribblenauts Unlimited, that's really cool. Scribblenauts is great. Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge took a game that people hated at the time, Ninja Gaiden 3, and made it a game people tolerated. You had some cool, like, Wii U exclusive ports of games, like Mass Effect 3 Special Edition, Batman Arkham City Armored Edition, and like, Call of Duty Black Ops 2, that was cool on Wii U. There was some good stuff there. There was some decent stuff to play on Wii U at launch. I 100% believe that. But at the same time, like, you did not have a damn reason to buy this thing. You had, like, stuff to do if you already bought it, but, yeah, there was no reason to buy a Wii U at launch. Like, most of this stuff was already on 360 and PS3. It was cheaper on Xbox 360 and PS3. It ran better, it looked better, it had more content on Xbox 360 and PS3, and the Nintendo published stuff was good, was decent, but, like, it wasn't enough, man. So, like, at the end of the day, I kind of feel like it evens out with the Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch had a killer app. Even if that killer app was available on Wii U, you had Breath of the Wild at launch. That was a big deal. But you know, it didn't really have the quantity, but the Wii U had the quantity, but at the same time, it was kind of like, who the hell cares, man? Obviously, very little people did. It's the Wii U. So yeah, after all this, I do think I kind of realized it's really hard to get a perfect launch lineup going. You know, I didn't even rank any of these S tier because, yeah, I think, you know, you can always criticize these launch lineups, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It kind of matters like the momentum after the launch, you know? Like, yeah, having some stuff to play on the very first day is important, but what are you doing in a couple weeks, you know? And I think GameCube did a great job with that. I think Nintendo Switch did a great job with that. I think Wii U and 3DS tried to fart a bunch of stuff out at the very start, and then after that, what did they have to show? They had nothing for like months. So let that be a lesson to you if you're creating a launch lineup for a video game console. Who the hell are you? Why are you listening to me then?